From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 2 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
There's a world of investment opportunities out there. Spotting them takes experts on the ground, assessing potential firsthand. Templeton, a pioneer in global investing for over 50 years. Gain from our perspective.
Issue 1, the American Dream.
The economic expansion that began in the middle of last year is proceeding at a moderate pace, supported by stimulative monetary and fiscal policies. We will continue to carefully assess ongoing financial and economic developments.
America is recession-weary, now in its 3rd year since the meltdown, and more bad news this week. Item, jobs vanish. Employment last month dropped 301,000 workers. Item, banks busted. 96 banks have shut down so far this year, on track for the highest number in 18 years. Item, markets wobble. The Dow fell 6.6% this year. The S&P has dropped 5.0%. Item, confidence plunges in June from 62.7 to 52.9 on the Conference Board Index. 10 points in 1 month. Item, retail sales, manufacturing, automaking, all down. Little wonder that the 4th annual MetLife study of the American Dream shows that the percentage of Americans who believe the U.S. economy will be the same or worse than last year is 67%. 2 out of 3 people, which is consistent with the position taken by the Federal Reserve Board Chairman Ben Bernanke in his testimony to Congress this week.
Even as the Federal Reserve continues prudent planning, we also recognize that the economic outlook remains unusually uncertain.
Despite the hardships, optimism lives on. 70% of Americans still believe they will someday live the American dream. Question, clearly Americans are resilient. We bounce back. What explains that resilience in Americans, Pat?
Well, John, dreams have always died hard in America, and the reason they die hard is because this country has been such a magnificent success for so many hundreds of millions of people for so many centuries. It really has, and Americans are a resilient people. They're an innovative people. They're a hardworking people. But the problem I think we've got now, John, is that we're no longer the producers we once were. We were consumers. We used to be a family-centered, a child-centered society. We're now a self-centered society. Consumerism takes up 70% of everything we produce. We don't save like other countries did. It is the character of the nation and the character of the regime, if you will, the government, which is, we're very much a welfare, big government state that we were not when you and I were growing up. So I think there are a lot of changes, and not all of them are for the good.
Why aren't you mentioning that the immigrant population came here because this was the land of opportunity?
It was a land of opportunity.
And that's bred in our DNA.
But look, the immigrant population today, they come, John, and the vast majority of them wind up beneficiaries of government who pay less in taxes than they consume in benefits, and that's a dramatic change from the generation of 1890 to 1920.
Eleanor, do you think we still have a hard work ethic? And hard work brings results?
Well, I'm going to quibble with several of these statistics. First of all, the stock market has recovered half of what it lost when the real collapse happened. The car manufacturers are doing pretty well, and GM is going gangbusters in China. And I wish I had the statistics at my fingertips to refute what you just said about immigrants, because I think they still are the lifeblood of this country.
Right.
And they are hardworking,
and
they feed into the American dream. Americans are optimistic by nature, and other people want to come here. They used to think the streets were paved with gold. They probably don't think that anymore, but we have an education system that is pretty accessible to everyone, and education is the ticket up here. So we have a mobility between the classes that you don't have in a lot of parts of the country. The one part of the American dream that is fraying is that part about your children are going to do better than you do. And I think that's not the case, and so some of those values are changing.
The assumption is that hard work and personal effort are rewarded in this society.
Right.
Is that still true of today?
I think that is still true, that if you take big risks, there's always the chance for a big reward or big blow up, big failure. But that is part of the fabric that has driven American success and prosperity over so many decades and so many centuries. I think when you ask about what is unique about America, I think that still holds true. If you go all the way back to the founding of the Republic, you look at this ragtag bunch of country farmers and country lawyers who pulled themselves together and defeated the world's greatest army, the British. Ever since that time, John, we have had this incredible pioneering spirit, whether it was the westward movement or whether it was going off into space. I think now we've had a temporary pause, but like all temporary pauses that we have had throughout our history, this too shall pass. And I think the question of optimism is a good one, because I know all previous generations have felt optimistic, even in times of shorter recessions than the one we're experiencing now. Positivity will come back.
Beth Hirshon, welcome. Do you think that the performance of political leaders affects the attitude towards reward, and reward is given for good work? Does it affect the American dream, whether or not we have good leaders?
The American people feel that the playing field is not as level as it once was, that the hard work is not all that it takes. It takes a little bit more help than that. And they don't feel advantaged by their leaders right now. They feel disadvantaged by their leaders. But to your point about why is the dream still alive and kicking with all of this terrible news, one thing that we didn't bring up is really that the dream has become as much about the journey as it is about the destination, meaning that the dream is our guidepost. The dream is something that keeps us getting out of bed in the morning. So it's also just as much about the journey as it is about where we're trying to land.
John, let me talk about the leaders. There's no doubt that leaders do make a difference. Let's take Herbert Hoover versus FDR. Whether you agree with FDR or not, enormous confidence, people said, and hope. Take Jimmy Carter and then Ronald Reagan for 8 years. The dramatic change in attitudes and sentiments and feeling, even though both FDR and Reagan started off with the country really in a slew of
Well, there's another reason why Reagan was so popular, because he had tax breaks. And those tax breaks yielded an economy that grew by 9.8% while he was in office.
Well, I'm sure it did. I mean, his ideas worked, but he inspired the country.
You think he psyched people into it, or in a manner of speaking, he bought their confidence?
It was morning in America after 3.5 years of Ronald Reagan before the Great Recovery took hold.
This gets to Beth's point about whether or not people perceive their government, their leadership as helping them or not. And with the current administration and Congress, all of this massive government intervention, Americans are saying, wait a minute, we want our free market back. Get out of our way.
This is going to be another crowning of President Reagan as the leader we want to bring back from the 80s.
As opposed to Barack Obama.
Yes, please.
I think
why don't you join in one?
Are you warning us now?
No,
is this an admonition?
If we're going to talk about President Reagan, let's remember in his first year, he was at 42% popularity. He had unemployment of 10.8%, and he managed to come out of that.
Right.
It is way too early to be dancing on the grave of President Obama.
Hold on, Pat. Exit question. The MetLife study, and by the way, congratulations on it, Beth. Thank you. The study shows that average Americans are still optimistic about being able to achieve the American dream in their lifetimes. The final question, is that optimism well placed or is it misplaced?
I mean, I have to agree. I have to agree with Eleanor. I think for the coming generations, it's going to be, our generation will work very, very hard and got a great deal of success. Coming generations, I don't know if they're going to do as well because of a lot of inherent problems, the death of manufacturing in America, the size of government, the size of regulation, litigious society, welfare state. I don't know.
You mean that's squeezing out the basic core of capitalism?
I think it is the government sector is squeezing out the private sector.
Well, you can go down all the negative ledger and phrase it like Pat did, or you can look at the boundless opportunities now that we have this world of the internet. You can look at a new economy that is going to have to come. That green economy is going to have to be produced, and you look at more and more opportunities for education in this country. And I think the millennials, who are going to be the biggest generation in history once they come online, they say, great, I'm going to have 3 careers in my lifetime. I don't have to depend on one employer, and I'm going to get a gold watch after 20 years. They look at all these things as opportunity, and I think that is in the American spirit and the American dream.
Monica Crowley.
One of the great things about America, John McLaughlin, is that we're self-correcting. So we have had hard left progressive presidents and administrations before, and it produces folks like Ronald Reagan, Pat Buchanan, and the country does correct, and that's why I think the optimism is well placed.
Jimmy Carter, if he's hearing this, it'll be the first time he will have been called
You
hard
can't even
left.
stand to let the other side speak. It's unbelievable.
I think it's well placed, and I will amplify what Monica was saying about self-correcting on an individual level. The reason why it's well placed is because people believe in the dream because they believe in their own abilities, attitude, and work ethic. And that's healthy, that's hardiness. But they also are saying, and I haven't seen this too often, that they now accept financial responsibility as being part of what's required to achieve the dream.
The answer is it is well placed because we have a constitutional system of limited government. Issue 2, the impossible dream.
To dream the impossible dream, to fight.
I'm feeling it. I mean, when I shop for food, when I pay my bills like rent, cable.
Got a 12.5% reduction on my salary, and it's affected me a lot. I bought a brand new car last year and barely could make the payments on it.
The American dream was once defined in terms of material possessions, their price, their number. The dream's core elements used to be net worth, asset accumulation, buying power, and of course, brand. Louis Vuitton, Ralph Lauren, Rolls-Royce, Gems by Harry Winston, East Hampton second homes, those were the marks of success. The mantra being, he who dies with the most bling wins. Not anymore. During this GM Great Meltdown, the MetLife survey says that the American dream has morphed before our very eyes. In the new dreamscape, conspicuous consumption is kaput. Personal relationships trump bling. Friends, family, marriage, children. Bling is out. People are in. 77%, almost 4 out of 5 people in this country say that quality of life is defined by improved relationships. And 87%, almost 9 out of 10, say they've reevaluated priorities to put more emphasis on personal relationships. 58%, almost 3 out of 5, define the American dream as having a family and having children. Question, what do Americans see as the main ingredient of the American dream? Beth Hirshon.
They still see financial security still trumping family, although now more out of necessity because they're just trying to hang on.
They want a safety net.
They do.
Well, Johnny, look, where I do disagree, I agree with the end of what your setup there. I disagree that the whole idea of the American dream is about who's going to make a lot of money, who's going to have a little yacht or a home in East Hampton and stuff like that. It always was a sense of community, a sense of family, a sense of group friends and things like that, and enough in life really to get along without all this excess stuff. I mean, Harry Winston Jules, I don't know anybody I ever heard of, except a couple people in New York was even interested in that junk.
Yeah, that was
junk, Pat.
That was pitched for the ultra rich, basically. Maybe a Louis Vuitton.
Where's Mort Zuckerman when we need him?
Well, we're talking about degrees of success.
Yeah, well, and I think that always has been an element in American life. It used to be known as keeping up with the Joneses is what it was called. And a lot of people measured their success by cars, the cars in the house in the suburbs. But I do think that as the economy contracts, people look for satisfaction, contentment closer to home. And you see, I mean, all the internet dating sites are very popular. I think people are looking for relationships. Facebook is reaching out to all these kind of fake friends, but friends nonetheless.
You think we're becoming Italians, meaning friends and family, but also economic stagnation
and food and wine and great cheese? Maybe. I hope so. Look,
Dolce far niente, sweet do nothingness.
Right. Well, look, I mean, I certainly think that is part of the trend that we're seeing coming out of this Great Recession. People are going back to what really matters, which is family relationships, good friend relationships, because so many other things have fallen away. And everything that we once thought we knew for sure, upward mobility, the job was always going to be the house, we'd always be able to meet that mortgage payment, that is no longer true. So people are going back to the fundamentals. But I don't think that takes away from the essential threads in the American fabric, which is that all of those things you mentioned, most Americans probably don't have them, but they aspire to have them at some point. It's aspirational, and that's not going away.
Beth, your study says that the 67% of Americans, that's more than a consensus, believe that the recession is going to last for 3 years before we recover. Do you think that's a further indication that we will turn more to families and friends because the country is faced with that as the alternative to high style, bling?
I think people are going to continue talking about turning to friends and family and building relationships, but more so out of necessity than just a deep-seated shift in beliefs. I mean, this relationship building, the price is right, first of all. And secondly, they need support at this time. So it's not that people don't care about keeping up with the Joneses anymore. They're just sort of tempered that a little bit. We may see that more of that coming back.
But you know, John, in a natural disaster, people tend to come together a lot more. You know, all this individualism goes out the window. And in a sense, this financial disaster is the same way. But I will say this, John, there's a big debate whether the economy, we're going to have a second dip. And frankly, it does not look good. People are talking about this unemployment staying at least 7% up until 2015, which I think would be a real pall on the country.
Issue 3, the demand deficit.
It's been hard. Right now I'm unemployed.
Jobs are a little scarce. Not a little, they're a lot scarce.
Oddly, the more Americans spend and the less they save makes the economy better. Almost 3/4 of our GDP, 70%, comes from consumer spending. The American consumer is the engine of global trade. From Beijing to London to Buenos Aires to Canberra, the wheels of international commerce are turned by the huge buying engine of Americans. The nations that export to the U.S., notably China and Australia, depend on Americans first and foremost. The goods that Asia now produces and Americans demand help keep the wheels of the world's economy whirring. But Americans are changing their habits. 93% of Americans now say they plan to save. 75% say they spend less now than last year. 77% save now. They are saving, but the result is a consumption deficit. That is a deficit of private sector demand. That deficit of demand kills a strong recovery, some say. Remember, the fuel of the new American dream, saving is in, consumption is out, and that's the problem, some say.
Questions. Asians are the world's biggest savers. Are Americans going to replace Asians as the world's biggest savers? Monica.
Not quite, John, not quite. I think out of necessity, a lot of Americans are saving now because the job situation is still so shaky. Either they're unemployed or perhaps their job is on the line. And so they're putting a lot of money into a nest egg, or as much as they can, week to week, month to month, as a bulwark against future upset in the economy. And in many ways, it's sort of like the Great Depression generation. That generation, my grandparents' generation, saved everything. They saved water bottles because they were all afraid that it was going to happen again. I think you're seeing some of that, but I think when the economy comes back, the consumption will come
You realize
back.
the Chinese are saving about 10% of their income?
More, 35 to 50%. But John can remember the Great Depression and tell you how they were saving those water bottles. Right, John?
Well, I remember I remember Roosevelt's Enlightened Works Progress Administration, which is a quasi-socialism, still around today.
I bet you were a CCC boy also.
And that helps sustain the economy.
But the Americans save probably now, it used to be 0 or -1, we probably save 5%. The Chinese are up to 35 to 50%. Of course, it's mandatory savings, and now they're starting to spend more. You're never going to get like the Asians.
The Chinese are not presented with the consumer consumer smorgasbord that we have in this country. Right. But they will. And as they become a more modern society, they're going to eventually overtake us in consuming simply by their sheer numbers. And I wouldn't give up on Americans as spenders either. They're not spending as much now simply because they're scared, but that's going to change.
What's the answer to the paradox? We save,
there is no answer to the paradox. That's why it's a paradox.
Saving defeats demand, and demand, you've got to have consumer buying before you have an appreciable increase in the economy.
You have to build a society that also makes things. And this
you got to start producing again.
We produce, and the export volume is enormous.
It is not. We have a trade
deficit. The Chinese buy it.
The trade deficit is back up to $500 billion a year.
We produce iPods and every variation of an iPod, cell phones,
who do you think the biggest export of China to the United States is computers?
This savings you're talking about, John, this is a little different than what the Asian savings plan is about. This is savings for an emergency fund to make it to, not missing, not falling into disaster if you miss one paycheck. I don't even know if I would really characterize this as saving. It's just more not spending.
Right. It's an emergency rainy day fund.
It's the first tier of the safety net that people are desperately trying to build.
Right. So we're not in agreement that there is a demand deficit.
Well, right now there is. Yes.
Right now there is.
Right now there is, and that is one of the big reasons why the economy is faltering, because 70% of this economy is driven by consumerism.
Remember how the government has been trying to fill the hole? Cash for clunkers, that type of program?
The home buyers.
You think that's the role of the government?
No.
Yes.
Well,
you think the government can fulfill the obligation?
Those things, if it's going to do something, cash for clunkers and cash for houses are good programs if the government's going to do it.
Issue 4, talking about my generation.
People try to put us talking about my generation.
My friends and I are all in a place where everything is unknown, especially those of us that don't have jobs yet or aren't going to school. It's scary. Am I underqualified? Am I overqualified? I don't know what I'm doing wrong. When I go to interviews, there are people there that are 20, 30 years older than me.
People aren't leaving their jobs, with the economy and everything, so there's not positions opening up for us.
The economic crisis affects us all. It doesn't affect us all equally, though. Its impact is as different as the generations themselves. Take the baby boomer, the best educated, hardest working, and most affluent generation in American history, while 17% of boomers say they are unemployed and looking for work. Barely 1 in 3 says they have achieved the American dream. The meltdown liquidated their home values, 401ks, stock portfolios. Optimism that they'll achieve the dream dropped 6% between 2009 and 10. The boomers are swelling the ranks of the Tea Party. Polling data on Tea Party supporters is nearly identical to polling data on baby boomers.
Question, are the boomers reliving their youth by once again taking their protests to the streets, Beth?
No, they're not. There's 80 million boomers, so and there are very few people on the street now. So the boomers are right now, it doesn't mean they're happy. They're right now more stressed than they've ever been. Half of them are losing sleep over concerns about paying bills and making ends meet, but we don't see them taking to the streets in large numbers.
Do you see any correspondence between the Tea Party and the boomers?
I think the Tea Party, it's a little younger age, just right under there.
How about characteristics like anti-authoritarian, anti-government, anti-politician?
That anti-authoritarianism was a ways back for the boomers.
You got to realize, John,
didn't the boomers
the baby boom generation is gigantic. It's the biggest of them all. It was not only in the mud at Woodstock, it was in the mud at Khe Sanh. It also, when it went out and voted, for Ronald Reagan, even though there were a lot of radicals in that generation in the 60s. So that's a changing generation. It's more mature now, and it's the most successful. They've got tough times, but a lot of the Tea Parties are silent generation.
Hold on. I want to break down the generations. Generation break down the nomenclature. Greatest generation, born between 1901 and 1924, age today 86 to 109. Silent generation, I'm giving you only ages, 65 to 85. Baby boomers, 46 to 64. Generation X, age 29 to 45. Generation Y, 16 to 28. Generation Z, 0 to 15. All of these generations, which one fears it is losing ground most in achieving the American dream?
I just want to finish what I tried to say earlier, and that is that the baby boomers gave us the civil rights revolution, the feminist revolution, and the anti-war movement. So they've put their name on the map.
They gave us gay rights protests too?
The gay rights protests are actually a later generation. You have the later generations.
They gave us civil rights. They gave us civil rights protests.
They're not biased against gay people, at least.
The gay protests go back.
Well, to answer your question, though, I think the baby boomers are the generation that fears that they have the most to lose in this crisis, because older Americans, the greatest generation, silent generation, frankly, they don't have that much time left. So they've saved, and I hate to sound crude about it, but really they've already settled in their life. The baby boomer generation still is looking forward to retirement, and their retirement savings are gone.
What is unanalogous between the baby boomers and the Tea Party? What does not match?
Well, the Tea Party, though, it stretches across all demographics, John. It's not just limited to the baby boomers. What you're saying is the rejection of big government, the rejection. But the baby boomers were out in the streets with a far left liberal mindset back in the 1960s.
Aside from the age differential and the stratum, aren't the fundamentals exactly the same? The Tea Party and the Boomers.
Well, the Boomers are in the Tea Party, John, but Generation Y, I think, is more conservative. The Baby Boomers are an enormous success, and they got some problems. But Generation Y, they are being dropped out of their jobs. They can't be retrained.
But
they got young people coming
regroup,
up.
Pat.
But
they have
here's
time
the
to
thing.
regroup
I
where the
think
baby
they're caught
boomers
in
don't.
the middle of this thing.
Yeah,
I think they're caught in the middle between the young people and the economy sinking.
But they've got more college degrees and advanced degrees than anyone else. They've got a great deal of potential, and they're living longer. I think they'll make up for this lost time.
Which generation?
I'm on the optimistic side.
Force prediction. The economy is headed for a double-dip recession.
I'm afraid so.
No.
No, but very stagnant growth.
No, as long as we can avert deflation.
No, but stagnant growth. Don't forget to join our discussion on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. Bye-bye.
Investing takes perspective. It comes from navigating up and down markets for 60 years, spotting opportunities at home and abroad. Global investing from Franklin Templeton Investments. Gain from our perspective.